Hello, everybody, and welcome back. It's good to be with you again. Chapter 6 this time. Not just privacy, but privacy and the government, right? So, Richard Nixon said, and it was in the first page of this chapter, a system that fails to respect its citizens' right to privacy fails to respect its citizens, right? I think that's a profound and powerful statement. Privacy is a limit on government power, as well as power of private sector companies, right? The more someone knows about us, the more power they can have over us. So personal data is used to make very important decisions in our lives. And in the wrong hands, I think we would all agree, personal data can be used to cause great harm. So the agenda here, this is page 1 of the agenda, page 2, following the outline of the book. Now, this is very important, privacy and the government. Back in 1989, there was an actress named Rebecca Schaeffer. I remember seeing her on some sitcom, right? But she'd apparently done some work prior to then. Well, she was actually shot in her front door, shot to death by a guy named Robert Bardo. And Bardo got Schaeffer's home address from a private investigator who actually went and purchased it, her driver's license information, right? And so Congress passed a law called the Driver's Privacy Protection Act in 1994. And it prohibits states from revealing certain personal information about drivers. It also requires states to provide this information to the federal government. See, so it wasn't just limiting the release of that information, but now mandates sharing that information with the federal government. Well, since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, Americans do support some of this expanded reach into our privacy. Expanded camera surveillance on the streets and in public places. Law enforcement monitoring the internet discussions in chat rooms and other forums, right? This closer monitoring of the banking system, cell phones, and emails. Remarkably, 1/3 of those polled actually agreed. Sure, let us have it. And I've mentioned before, part of my thesis is that the younger generation wants their privacy, but they'd rather have convenience or access, which, again, it's just a choice. But know what you're giving up, know what the costs are, right? Doesn't really matter. Where the older generations tend to, from a different world, want extreme privacy, right? So so it's a balancing act, right? Privacy law, then, we'll discuss first. It refers to the laws that deal with the regulation, storing, and the use of our personally identifiable information, often known as PII. In addition, privacy laws also refer to the healthcare information, like in HIPAA in the U.S., and financial information of individuals, which can be collected by the governments, public or private organizations, or other individuals. So some examples of federal legislation that limits the collection from individuals. It's a balancing act. What do we limit? What do we allow? Back and forth, right? And we'll ebb and flow based on the time period. There was a time when, we'll talk about the Patriot Act, when most Americans would agree, yes, do it. And today, I think many Americans would agree, maybe not a great idea in all aspects, right? We'll talk about FISA and their role, for example. Privacy isn't in the Constitution. Again, part of this balancing act. Okay, now we're doing this on our own. So it may be difficult for a legislative, executive, and judicial branches to find the right compromise. That's what you're about. You're about helping them as citizens. And as individuals of the good world that we live in. So in this chapter, we consider the impact, again, of this federal, state, and local governments, right? The impact they've had on information privacy. Privacy, as I mentioned, doesn't appear in the Constitution, and so hence part of this challenge. So what we'll do then to help us solve this is to use this taxonomy of privacy. This taxonomy of privacy is broken down into 4 categories. There's information collection, which is gathering it; information processing, which is storing it, manipulating it, and using it; information dissemination, which is the spread of personal information; and of course, invasion. Right? When we intrude upon a person's daily life, when we interrupt their solitude, or cause interference with someone's decision-making capability. So we'll look first at legislative restrictions. So there are many laws. For example, the Privacy Act of 1974 protects personal information held by the federal government by preventing unauthorized disclosures of information. Another example would be the Data Protection Act of 2018. This is the United Kingdom's implementation of the General Data Protection Regulations, or GDPR. Everyone responsible for using personal data has to follow these strict rules called the Data Protection Principles, and they must make sure the information is used fairly, lawfully, and transparently. There are many other examples. I just throw out a few to kickstart this discussion. So, the Employee Polygraph Act, Protection Act of 1988 is an example, EPPA. This prohibits most private employers from using lie detectors, and employees can suffer economic loss based on this. There are exceptions, as I recall from my experience in the readings, that employers have suffered economic loss. They are an exception to the process, that they could use a lie detector, right? There are a few other exceptions, but they're rare and very narrow. So this EPPA does not apply to federal, state, and local governments also, for example. Now, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. This is meant to reduce the amount of information gathered from children, and we must obtain parental consent in order to gather this information. I think it was from children, it says on the slide, from children 12 years and younger. There is also, for example, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. This was designed to prevent discrimination in the areas of medical benefits and employment also, based on the use of your genetic information. So it prohibits, for example, health insurance companies from health plan administrators from requesting genetic information. And it forbids them from using genetic information they may have when making decisions about coverage, rates, or pre-existing conditions. Now, the law does not extend these non-discrimination protections to life insurance, disability insurance, or long-term care. The next section, so in the previous section, we considered ways we considered the federal government's actions. In this section, we're going to look at the ways the feds collect the vast amounts of sensitive information. So, for example, one way is the census, right? In order to ensure that each state has a fair representation in the House, the nation, by the Constitution, performs a census every 10 years. The original census was very narrow. It counted free white males, and then it also counted all other free persons by sex and color, and then it counted slaves, right? And as time passed, however, the number of questions asked during the census naturally increased. And sometimes the information is used in an interesting way. In 1940, the census is notable because for the first time, it actually used statistical sampling to put it to extensive use. It limited the number of ballots, information it had to collect through this sampling process, right? And that really went a long way to protecting your privacy while still gaining the information the government felt it needed to ensure a stable House population, U.S. House of Representatives, and funding to the states, right? So in 1940, it was a random sampling of the population. About 5% of those surveyed, they received a longer form with more questions, right? And that information was then bundled and used statistically. So it was used to produce detailed demographic profiles without substantially increasing the amount of data needed, as I mentioned. And now the Census Bureau is supposed to keep this information confidential, the information that it collects. However, in times of national emergency, the Census Bureau has revealed information to other agencies. Now, as I said, the census helps our communities determine, besides the number, the dispersion in the House of Representatives, it also determines where to build everything from schools to supermarkets and homes and hospitals, and it helps the government decide how to distribute the funds and assistance. But the data can have other purposes we want to be cautious about. We learned in a previous lesson that prior to World War II, IBM used the punch card system that the Census Bureau made famous, right? IBM takes that to Germany, and it helps the Germans organize the Jews in Germany according to their Nuremberg laws, which were official, right? So it can be used in other ways. Now, when we think of the government, many times we think of the IRS, right? We enacted a national income tax in 1962. That was during the Civil War. It was ruled unconstitutional. So by 1913, we have the 16th Amendment ratified, which gives the United States, the government, the power to collect income tax. And the tax form, as you can imagine, reveals a tremendous amount of personal information. There's also the FBI Crime Information Center. So the FBI has this National Crime Information Center, or NCIC, and it's a collection, actually, of databases, and it supports the activities of federal, state, and local law enforcement. So, for example, if you have a stolen automobile, stolen license plate, missing guns, stolen guns, other stolen items, missing persons, sex offenders, unidentified persons, etc. They're all part of this collection of databases, right? If you make a threat to the president, or if you're a foreign fugitive or a violent gang member, right? And the NCIC has led to privacy violations of innocent people, despite the good work and good intentions that it has done. Well, some of the good work it did was Tim McVeigh. He was the American terrorist responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing back in 1995. It killed 168 people in a federal building in Oklahoma City, injured more than 500 others, and it destroyed a third of the building, right? The NCIC databases was used to facilitate his takedown just 90 minutes after the event. Now, we also have the DOJ database, the Department of Justice. Managed by the Department of Justice, this provides state and local police officers access to information supplied by 5 federal law enforcement agencies: the FBI, the DEA, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the Bureau of Prisons, right? It stores incidents, reports, gives interrogation summaries, and other information not presently available in the NCIC. Now, critics will give local police officers will have access to information about people who have not been arrested or charged. Interesting approach. Closed circuit TVs, another consideration. The number of surveillance on TVs continues to increase. Unlike most police activity, which focuses on people who are suspects, this does not. Okay, we're going to come back with license plate scanners.